Back in 1970, 42-year-old Gertrude Bauer was living on the ragged edge of society in Hamburg's notorious St. Pauli district. She was scraping by as a part-time hairdresser and sex worker, constantly battling the bottle and finding herself on the streets, more often than not. One freezing winter evening, she crossed paths with a quiet local at a dive bar near the Reeperbahn who promised her a warm bed and plenty of booze if she came home with him. Desperate for shelter, Gertrude went back to his place on Zeiss Street, completely unaware she was walking straight into a death trap. Sometime in the early hours of December 1970, that tiny apartment became the setting for a nightmare. After knocking back a few drinks, her host decided that his hospitality came with a price tag: he wanted sex. When Gertrude refused to pay up, the man just completely snapped. He overpowered her, sexually assaulted her, and then wrapped his hands around her neck until she stopped moving. Trapped in that cramped room, she never stood a chance. As the sun came up, the killer stared down at the corpse on his floor and realized he was in deep trouble. He wasn't strong enough to haul a dead body down the stairs without turning heads, so he grabbed a saw to solve the problem. Right there on his living room floor, he went to work cutting Gertrude into pieces. He bundled the severed limbs into plastic bags and old rags, spending the next few nights scattering them around the city. Some parts got buried in the frozen dirt near a local dump, while others were shoved into the crawl space right above his ceiling. For days, the guy was a nervous wreck, waiting for the cops to come pounding on his door. He was convinced it was over. People had seen them leave the bar together, and he figured it was only a matter of time before detectives put two and two together. But the knock never came. Nobody even realized Gertrude was gone, a heartbreaking reality for women living on the fringe like she did. It wasn't until November 2nd, 1971, almost a full year later, that a construction worker clearing trash accidentally dug up a bundle of human remains. Authorities rushed to the scene and uncovered a gruesome collection of decomposed body parts. They found hands, a torso, and a skull, which forensic artists used to reconstruct the victim's face. While they managed to ID the victim as Gertrude, they had zero clues about who had taken her life. The killer had slipped through their fingers, disappearing back into the anonymity of Hamburg's grimy nightlife. He spent his nights knocking back drinks in dive bars, rubbing shoulders with sailors and outcasts. The experience taught him a dark lesson. If he targeted loners with no family, nobody would ask questions when they vanished. He also realized that strangulation was the perfect method for his thin-walled apartment. No screaming, no gunshots, no alarmed neighbors. For nearly 4 years after butchering Gertrude, he managed to keep a low profile. But the hunger to kill hadn't gone away. In August of 1972, things almost turned fatal again when he tried to assault a woman named Ruth. She managed to fight him off and ran into the streets stark naked to find the police. Unbelievably, the man who had chopped up Gertrude was only slapped with an assault charge. Investigators never looked into his background. Emboldened by his luck, he was back on the hunt by 1974. That summer, he zeroed in on 54-year-old Anna Buchel, another struggling soul who fit his victim profile perfectly. Anna was a fixture in the local pub scene, frequenting the same watering holes as the killer. She used to be a housewife, but had fallen on hard times, resorting to sex work to survive, and she knew this man from their nights at the tavern. One evening in August of 1974, he convinced Anna to come back to his place to keep the party going. They were both wasted after drinking for hours, and eventually, they ended up in bed together. But once the deed was done, the man was furious. He accused her of just lying there like a board, and in a drunken rage, he grabbed her by the throat. Just like before, he squeezed the life out of her right there in his flat. Staring at another dead body, he went back to his grim routine and started carving Anna up into smaller pieces. But this time, he didn't bother hauling the bags out to the dump. Instead, he simply walked the severed parts up the stairs and tossed them into the attic. He scrubbed the crime scene clean, and since nobody reported Anna missing, he thought he was in the clear. However, he ran into a serious issue weeks later when a horrific smell started drifting down from the top floor. Finally, the stench got so bad that a neighbor complained to the caretaker, unknowingly setting the end of the killer's spree in motion. The stench was undeniable. The sick, sweet odor of decay was permeating the hallway. Eventually, the building manager came knocking, demanding answers, but the tenant didn't even blink, offering up a smooth, calculated lie. He pointed the finger at the Greek family living upstairs, playing on local prejudices, and the landlord bought it hook, line, and sinker without ever checking the attic. Still, it was a close call, and the killer realized he'd been sloppy regarding the logistics of keeping corpses indoors. To keep the heat off, he needed to wage an all-out war on the stench drifting from his unit. He went out and bought an arsenal of industrial-strength air fresheners, dozens of those little pine-scented trees, and plastered them all over the flat and the crawlspace above. And for a hot minute, the chemical pine fog actually overpowered the scent of rot. Feeling untouchable, he didn't wait long to hunt again. As 1974 wound down, he set his sights on Freda Robick. Freda was 57, a woman who had fallen through the cracks and was selling her body to feed a severe alcohol addiction. It was that desperate lifestyle that put her right in the predator's path at the local dive bars. Just days before Christmas, on a bitter, freezing night, she agreed to go back to his place. Things went south when he realized cash was missing. He had already handed over 200 marks for her time. But then he checked his wallet and found she had swiped an extra 200 on the sly. Real or hallucinated, that perceived theft triggered a drunken explosion, and he snapped, lunging at her and choking the life out of her, just like the ones before. Sticking to his grim routine, he dismembered Freda and hauled the pieces up to the attic to rot alongside Anna. Even with the apartment smelling like a pine forest factory, the neighbors kept complaining about the foul odor, but management just sat on their hands. As the calendar flipped to a new year, his hunger for violence only intensified. We are talking barely 4 weeks after killing Freda. He claimed victim number 4 in early 1975. This time it was Ruth Schul, a 45-year-old local. Her story mirrored the others' hard times, rough living, and nights spent in the same watering holes as the killer. Their luck ran out on a frigid January evening when Ruth decided to accompany him back to his flat. The night started with heavy drinking, but then Ruth made a catastrophic error. She made fun of him. Word is, she laughed at his performance issues in the bedroom, a massive trigger for his fragile ego, and that humiliation sent him into a blind, alcoholic fury. He grabbed the liquor bottle and brought it down hard on her skull, dropping her instantly. While she was dazed and bleeding on the floorboards, he wrapped a ligature rumored to be a stocking around her throat. Ruth took her last breath right there on the carpet, becoming the final trophy for this shadow predator. But when he tried to stash her upstairs, he hit a snag. Ruth was a bigger woman, heavier than the previous girls. He resorted to his handsaw again, removing limbs and destroying her facial features to make the remains compact enough to hide. Instead of the attic, he ripped open a panel in his living space and stuffed parts of her butchered corpse into the wall cavity. So, by early 1975, he was literally living inside a tomb with 4 dead women. Tragically, the world hadn't even blinked at the disappearances of Anna, Freda, or Ruth. The monster kept up his routine, punching the clock as a factory guard by day and drowning himself in booze at the local haunts by night. But a secret that dark can't stay buried forever. The turning point came on July 15th, 1975, when a fire sparked in the building just past midnight. The blaze started in a ground floor unit, sending thick, black smoke billowing up the stairwell. Tenants scrambled out onto the street while the fire brigade rolled in to fight the inferno. They knocked down the main fire downstairs, but crews headed up to the top floor to ensure nothing was smoldering in the roof. The moment they cracked open the attic hatch above the second floor, they were gagging. The heat had cooked the rotting meat, magnifying the smell 1,000 times over. While trying to air it out, the firemen stumbled upon the gruesome source of the smell, and that is when the police were called in. Investigators didn't have to look far. All eyes turned to the tenant occupying the shoebox apartment right under that attic. He was nowhere to be found in the crowd, and suddenly, all those complaints about the bad plumbing smell clicked for the neighbors. Then came the smoking gun. Police discovered that this specific tenant held the only key to the attic space. That sealed it. As the sun came up, officers staked out the building, waiting for their man to come home. Sure enough, he walked right into the trap, identifying himself as 39-year-old Friedrich Paul Hunke. Everyone just called him Fritz. Fritz was slapped in cuffs immediately, the prime and only suspect in the House of Horrors. Back at the precinct, detectives turned up the heat. Confronted with the mountain of evidence dug up from his own apartment, Fritz finally cracked after hours of grilling. He spilled his guts about slaughtering 3 women, yet he remained tight-lipped about a 4th victim. However, by the close of July 1975, investigators firmly linked Fritz to 4 vanished women from Hamburg's red light district, the final piece of the puzzle being Gertrude. The city woke up to a nightmare splashed across the front pages. A serial killer had been operating right under their noses. But who was the man behind the madness? Fritz entered the world on July 31st, 1935, in Leipzig, Germany, born into a life already stamped with misery. He was one of 10 kids raised in destitute poverty and the chaos of war. His father, a namesake and a dedicated communist, was thrown into a concentration camp by the Nazis. Although liberated at the end of World War II, he returned a shattered shell of a man, drinking himself to death by 1947. Raising a massive family solo proved too much for Fritz's mother. She buckled under the pressure, and young Fritz spent his childhood bounced between German orphanages. With barely any schooling and a severe speech impediment, he grew up socially awkward and painfully shy. At 16, seeing a dead end in East Germany, he escaped the communist bloc and made a run for the West. By 1956, he had drifted to Hamburg, hoping to catch a break. Instead, tragedy struck that same year when a brutal bike accident left his face permanently mangled. His nose was smashed flat, healing into a crooked mess, and the trauma left him cross-eyed. Despite the bad hand he was dealt, Fritz tried to build a normal life. In 1957, at 22, he got married and quickly had a son. He attempted to play the part of a dutiful husband and father for a while, but the bottle already had its hooks deep in him. Heavy boozing and infidelity tore his domestic life apart almost as fast as it had started. Following the divorce, Fritz retreated to a cramped attic apartment in a gritty Hamburg neighborhood. Every spare moment was drowned in alcohol at the local dive bars. Experts later profiled him as a man consumed by a deep-seated misogyny, fueled by a lifetime of rejection and feeling like a loser. Standing just 5'6" with a twisted face and a meek personality, Fritz targeted women he felt were beneath him to regain some sense of control. Police recovered the very saw he used to hack the victims apart right inside his flat. The entire apartment served as a grim testament to his twisted psyche. Walls and ceilings were plastered with hundreds of pin-ups and stacks of adult magazines pointing to a severe fixation. The remains were hauled off for examination, where pathologists detailed the horrific post-mortem mutilation. One file noted that Ruth's legs had been sawed clean off at the thigh bone. He had excised her breasts, sliced off her ears, and even severed her tongue and the tip of her nose. As the interrogation dragged on, he eventually coughed up a full confession for all 4 homicides. Then things got weird. Fritz claimed he was following orders from the ghost of Jack the Ripper. Detectives immediately flagged this as a desperate attempt to plead insanity. They saw the truth. His crimes were born from humiliation and uncontrollable rage against women. So, he pivoted. He changed his story, claiming he was so blackout drunk during the killings that his memory was a total blank. Fritz's trial kicked off in Hamburg in November of 1976. The courtroom was jammed with reporters and onlookers, all craning their necks to glimpse the monster. From the start, the defense didn't deny he caused the deaths. Their game plan was to dodge a murder conviction by arguing diminished capacity. Fritz walked back his earlier confessions, sticking to the story that he had zero recollection of the actual murders. Then came the testimony from the psychiatric experts. They described a broken man, riddled with insecurity, sexual issues, and a hatred of women, diagnosing him with severe personality disorders and alcoholism. The experts explained that he only felt powerful when he was completely dominating a vulnerable victim. However, they noted that his efforts to hide the bodies proved he knew exactly what he was doing. The blackout defense didn't hold water. On December 20th, 1976, the verdict came down. He was convicted on all counts, but the judges bought the argument that the alcohol significantly reduced his responsibility. Consequently, he was tagged with only 1 murder and 3 counts of manslaughter, rather than 4 murder convictions. The court handed down a sentence of 15 years in a secure psychiatric facility. Fritz was released on schedule in 1993. By then, a man in his 50s, he adopted a fake name to vanish into obscurity. He eventually settled into a geriatric care center situated in a quiet coastal village. To the locals, he looked like any other harmless senior citizen, But as his life drew to a close, the darkness of Fritz's history refused to let him go. The orderlies and nurses reported that his mind was constantly under siege by terrifying delusions. He ranted endlessly about a putrid stench that nobody else could detect, swearing blindly that his quarters smelled exactly like decomposing flesh. Fritz finally breathed his last inside a Hamburg medical center on October 19, 1998, at the age of 63. For the longest time, a heartbreaking silence surrounded the 4 women he butchered, their identities eclipsed by the monster's notoriety. It took almost half a century, but officials in Hamburg eventually moved to set things right. In May of 2025, a dedicated monument was revealed in the graveyard, proudly displaying the names Gertrude, Anna, Freda, and Ruth. Today, those names are carved permanently into the rock. It stands as a promise that the 4 souls brutally extinguished by Fritz's hand will never fade into obscurity again.